Go. All right, good morning and happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome to what I believe is the 42nd episode of PatristiCast. And for this episode, I'm very delighted to welcome Emeritus Professor Ron Heine to discuss his new translation of Origen's, or the Philocalia of Origen. Ron Heine is Emeritus Professor of Bible and Theology at Bushnell University in Eugene, Oregon, though he resides now in Champaign, Illinois. Professor Heine, welcome to PatristiCast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
So I have spent most of my graduate work studying Origen. When I first went to graduate school, I planned on doing medieval church history and the mendicant orders and the intellectual life at universities. And then when I one of the first classes I took at the St. John School of Theology and Seminary in Collegeville, Minnesota, was patristics. And in that class, we read Book 4 of Origins on First Principles. We read On Prayer and his exhortation to martyrdom. And though I had heard of Origen's name before, I'd never read anything of his. And I remember I was just I was really blown away by the depth of his thought. And the rest is just history. And I said, okay, I'm not going to do medieval stuff anymore. I really want to read Origen more. He really grabbed me. And you have spent what, probably your entire career working with Origen, and you've produced many translations of Origen's works. How did you come across Origen, and how did you make the choice to um, dedicate your scholarly life to him, or at least a great deal of it to Origen?
Yes, well, it was by no means a straight path. It was very circuitous. I I started out planning to be a New Testament scholar,
Hmm.
and well, in fact, I probably started out planning to be a minister, and then I was a little bit too academic, I guess, or something. And I got caught up in academics, and uh, I was interested in Clement of Alexandria a bit. Uh, don't know that I'd really even heard of Origin, or if I had, it was just a name. Uh, and went one summer. This was after I'd finished all my studies. I was decided well, let me back up a minute. I went to the University of Illinois in the classics department.
Hmm.
So I studied classical Latin and classical Greek, and of course read all the classical authors. And so I was wanting to do something with Latin this summer, and I decided I would translate something in Latin. And so I looked at Origen's homilies on Genesis and Exodus and started working on those. And uh, it was it was just first of all just to be practicing in doing Latin, keeping working at Latin. But soon I got caught up in it and discovered a bit of how much Origen was doing and what he was doing,
Hmm.
and so I proceeded, and that book was published by the Fathers of the Church series. Uh, so that was sort of how I evolved into uh, working with Origen. Uh, you know, first of all, it was just a practice in doing Latin, and, and but soon he caught my attention to the various things he was doing, and so I pursued him, and and so that's here I am today after most of my life now having pursued Origin down his various pathways that he's taken me. Uh,
Well, I suspect a great number of people, at least in within the tradition of Latin Christianity, can attest to that. many of them didn't have Origen's Greek. They had Latin translations, and I'm sure that's how they got hooked as well. Um, but you, so the homilies on Genesis and Exodus, I mean, this is very interesting because Origen, of course, was a Greek writer, but you met him working on Latin translations of his homilies. And then you also did translations of some of his Greek works. You did the commentary on John in 2 volumes, that massive work. Um, Very recently, what 2019 maybe, or 2018 was it, when you finished the commentary on Matthew, I think, both the Greek and the Latin
Yeah.
text of it.
Yes, somewhere in that time zone.
All right. And now you have, and in your preface to this uh, new translation, so it's a bilingual translation. So we've got the English translation with Greek on the facing page, for which you use Robinson's critical edition. Um, but you say in your preface that this is probably going to be your final translation of Origen's works. And I think for the final selection, you picked a really good one, the Philocalia. Tell us about the Philocalia. What is it? What for the readers out there, or for the audience out there who might not really even be specialists or know any Greek, what does the word Philocalia mean, and how does this work get its title?
Yeah, it means something like beautiful text or beautiful selections.
Hmm.
And it was, we think it was uh, uh, Greg, Gregory, Gregory,
Nazianzen,
yeah, Gregory Nazianzen and his friend, can't think of his name right
uh,
now.
Basil of Caesarea.
Basil, yeah, Basil and Gregory Nazianzen,
Yep.
yes. We think it was these two men who made these selections. We don't know exactly why they did it. They seem to have sent it to a young priest, probably, that they who had sent them something as a kind of an Easter gift,
Hmm.
and so they sent him back this. But we really don't know why they selected these excerpts from Origen and put them together as they did. In a sense, it's a kind of a mystery as to how the Philokalia came into existence. But I think that satisfies me at least. That these two brothers, and they shared a year or so in a monastic kind of setting, and sometimes it's argued that they probably did this work during that time when they were together. So we don't know exactly how that happened, but these two men are the two that are accredited with putting this collection together, Gregory of Nazianzus and now I've forgotten his name.
Basil.
Basil, yeah, Basil of Caesarea. Uh, yeah, so that I think is as good as an explanation as I could give as to how this collection happened to be made. And why did they do it? Well, I talked about that a little bit somewhere, I
Mhm.
think, in the
Yeah.
preface or introduction. Uh, I think perhaps it was really for their congregations. They were both bishops and they had people under them who they were responsible for spiritual guidance.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of tensions and arguments going on about scripture at that time. A fellow named Eunomius was uh, uh, arguing that there were things that in scripture that you couldn't trust or
Mhm.
this or that, and so they put together this collection from Origen
Mhm.
about scripture and how to read scripture and how to interpret scripture and
Mhm.
those kind of subjects. And I think my guess is that they did it as much as anything for their own congregations,
Mhm.
uh, and to give them instruction in how to approach the Bible.
So, with in this opening um, description that you just gave, you really hit on two of the biggest um, issues for scholars facing the Philocalia, um, the who, and you um, can fall into the tradition that accepts that it was actually Gregory Nazianzus and Basil who compiled this selection. There are others. I think I can't remember his name. I think Neil Flynn is his name, and I can't remember his argument specifically, but I think he argued that it was either Eusebius of Caesarea, so somebody at an earlier period, decades before Gregory and Basil, or perhaps one of Eusebius's pupils. Um, I never really found that quite persuasive. I've as I've thought about this, it just seems like the easiest and most plausible explanation for the who is Gregory and Basil. I don't know what have you looked into the arguments against um, them being the compilers when you were working on your translation?
Well, I'm sure I must have considered them, but I
Mhm.
don't have memory of them right
Yeah.
now, what those arguments were.
Mm.
Uh, I have great doubts that it was Eusebius or
Yeah.
connected directly with Eusebius. But otherwise, no,
Yeah.
I can't really comment much on that question of who
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah, I don't know. In my opinion, it just seems like the easiest explanation and the most plausible is that it came from Gregory and Basil. And one of the pieces of evidence for that is that short little letter that Gregory wrote to this Theodore of Tiana when
Mhm.
he sent it to him. As you said, kind of like an Easter gift in response to something that this Theodore had given to Gregory. And then the other issue, is the why, and you brought up that it really does just seem to the nature of the selections suggests that it's really about deepening one's engagement with Scripture, especially in light of some of the issues with which Gregory and Basil were kind of dealing in the second half of the fourth century. So if that's the case, let's talk a little bit about the text itself, because as you say in your introduction, this isn't actually um, uh, Origen didn't compile this. It's
Right.
compiled from Origen's works, and there are what are there 27 I think selections. Is that correct? Um, and most scholars seem to kind of divide them into selections 1 through I think it's 20 that deal with biblical interpretation, and then 21 through 27 which deal with uh, free will, but even in light of biblical passages. So even those, while they're dealing with the philosophical problem of free will, are exegetical in their nature, correct? Is that
Right.
pretty accurate?
Yes. Yes.
So, um, talk a little bit about the structure of the Philokalia. What's going on there? Does it does its structure, in your opinion, have coherence, or is it random selections? What do you think is going on there?
Well, I think that there's a bit of random selection, but I think there's some coherence too. I think I had an argument somewhere about chapter 13. Is that the,
That's like the crux you said. Yeah, that's the letter
yeah,
to Gregory. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yep.
that I think is sort of the midpoint for the compilers here, is this letter to Gregory. And uh, it's it's if you read that letter carefully, it's about scripture, how to interpret scripture. And he talks about philosophy in this letter, but it's beware of philosophy. Philosophy can help you, but you have to watch out because it can also lead you astray.
Mhm.
But the letter's really about scripture, and I think that's the thing to divide the work up. It's not, if you look at the mass, it's not exactly in the middle, but
Mhm.
it is a, a very important dividing point, I think,
Mhm.
and that it's talking about particularly the way that how philosophy has misguided so many people,
Mhm.
Christian people,
Yeah.
that they've gone astray, and like the guy that came back from Egypt uh, and led the Israelites astray. Uh, so philosophy can do the same thing.
Mhm.
Uh, so I think that what uh, what they're after is scripture, how to read scripture, how to interpret scripture, and that this little letter sort of marks. It's not exactly a midpoint in terms of the bulk of the book,
Mhm.
but it's a sort of a midpoint in the way of the thought in the book.
Mhm. It is a peculiar placement, as you say, because it's a letter that Origen wrote to his student or former student at the time. So it's not an exegetical work in itself. Like
No,
all the chapters 1 through 12 are all exegetical, and then you have this very interesting letter, which is much more of his encouragement to Gregory Thaumaturgus to dedicate, even though he's leaving Origin School, and he's, I think, was he going to return to become a lawyer? I
well,
think,
he says he's capable, or he says he's capable at least of being that.
right? Yeah, that's right, because Gregory met Origin. It's actually kind of an interesting story, the way Gregory tells it in his big address of Thanksgiving at his departure from Origin School, and he says so Gregory was he was from was it Neo-Caesarea? So like modern day
I think
Turkey.
so. I think so. Yeah.
And he had planned out that he was going to embark on a legal career. So he and I think what his brother um, moved to, or they were going to modern day Beirut to continue their legal studies. And on their way, they met Origen. And Gregory says Origen just kind of like drew them in, kind of like a magnet, almost like they didn't have any control. They were so drawn to him. Uh, but then he leaves and he goes back home, and Origen says, still dedicate your life. And it's in this where he uses that great expression, these things are like handmaids, like philosophy is a handmaiden to the
Right.
study of scripture, correct? But it can lead people astray. It is also that letter, by the way. So the cover art is Eileen McGuckin's icon, Origin Teaching the Saints.
Right.
And if you look at the book roll there, it says, attend above all else to the reading of the scriptures. And that's a quote from this letter that
Right.
Origen writes to Gregory. Yeah, that isn't, I don't know of anybody else who's made that connection, identifying chapter 13 as kind of the linchpin that kind of gives the structure of the text its coherence. But that's
Yeah.
actually quite interesting. Um, do you, I have a couple of favorites, and perhaps one would indicate just kind of what Origin is getting at. Um, when he says, philosophy is great and it can be a helpful tool, but it can lead people astray. And that's illustrated somewhat in a couple of different chapters, and one of them is chapter 23. That's that very lengthy one. Part of it comes from the commentary on Genesis, um, where he um, comments on Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. God established the stars as signs. Um,
Signs, yes.
and he really takes issue with people who think that human events are determined by the stars and the
Right.
alignment of the stars. And they use this text as some kind of proof text that scripture is kind of teaching some kind of astral determinism. That's one of my favorites. Do you have any particular favorite sections?
Oh, no. I like some of the last ones that probably aren't by origin. Uh,
Oh,
they're very way down on my list of favorites.
oh,
But
okay. That would be like what, chapter 24?
uh,
Is that right?
yes,
Yeah. Yeah, I think
and
yeah, that comes from it's Methodius, right? Methodius of Olympus,
yeah, yeah, it's not from origin.
right?
Uh,
Another one of my favorites is 26 because there he that actually before we get into 26, um perhaps you could talk because this is quite important here. So Gregory and Basil at the beginning of each section they give a little heading, right, about
right.
that describes the subject
What's in the
matter
chapter?
of yeah and that's another way to kind of help um, separate one chapter from another. And in chapter 26, this is what they say. Where is it? Oh, that 26 is one of the longer ones. So, chapter 26 is a selection from uh, Origen's commentary on Psalm number 4. And here's what they say, quote, on the question about what things are good and what are evil, and that these things lie within the control of our will and outside the control of our will, considered in relation to the teaching of Christ, but not in the way Aristotle understands them. Now, I don't think Origen brings up Aristotle directly in the selection, if I remember right. Um,
Mhm. No, I don't
but
think so.
certainly Basil and Gregory were familiar with Aristotle's writings on this, and they're presenting this here kind of almost as a response to Aristotle in a certain way. And the verse in question from Psalm 4 is many will say, who will show us the things that are good? And then Origen, in his very typical way, will um, list several different definitions from the various kind of philosophical traditions.
Right.
Another great example, I think, of how he incorporates philosophical learning into his biblical exegesis. Yeah, that is one of the longer ones, isn't it?
Yes.
There was one that I wanted to ask you about because uh where is it here? Yeah, so chapter 8, it comes from his lost commentary on Hosea. And again, as you point out in your introduction, the Philocalia is our only witness to some of these works of origin. Like this commentary on Hosea is lost, and this
Yes.
extract here is the only thing we have of it, making it incredibly valuable. Um, but it's here where Origin um, tries to get at the issue that biblical language sometimes seems inconsistent. Um, there are passages, he says, in Hosea where the text will start with a plural and then it immediately transitions into a singular and then going back to the plural. And there were some, who would use these kinds of inconsistencies to argue against the legitimacy of certain biblical texts, and for certain people, perhaps like Marcion, even reject the Old Testament altogether. Um, when we, so you mentioned that this collection here is oriented towards helping people become better biblical readers. Um, Certainly this one and a couple others that we just looked at kind of fit that mold. Um, what does this kind of say about the reception of Origin at this time? Certainly, he hadn't been condemned yet as a heretic. Um, the Origenist controversy at the end of the fourth century hadn't come. But uh, he certainly wasn't without his critics. Yet these two geniuses from uh, Cappadocia are presenting Origen as a kind of teacher or something, right?
Right.
A teacher for engaging scripture. So the fact that they don't really include passages or very many passages from Origen that deal with Trinitarian issues, which is where Origen found himself in early trouble, and focus more on biblical interpretation. Do you think that suggests anything about how he was being received at this time?
How Origin was being received.
How Origen, yeah, yeah.
Uh, well, perhaps, uh, because by this time, he's been, I don't know if the official condemnation has come
Hmm.
about yet, but he's been condemned by a large portion of people in the church
Hmm.
for his scripture interpretations. So I think that we can see there's some kind of a polemic here uh, in defense of Origin
Hmm.
and his way of interpreting scripture. And if you notice, he's very specific here. He's noticed differences between they and him
Yeah.
and so forth, and pointing out how you have to look at these details in the text if you're going to
Hmm.
understand the text correctly.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
so uh, yeah, and he keeps noting these places where it switches from the plural to the singular, uh, but saying that that doesn't mean something's gone wrong in the scripture.
Hmm.
It's just what scripture is trying to communicate uh, in this.
Yeah, and he does something very ingenious with this in paragraph 2. He says, let me see if I could find where the quote begins here. So he's talking about God addressing Adam in the garden in paradise. Quote, you, and then you bracket singular, the singular you here, may eat from every tree in the garden for food, but you, plural, shall not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And on the day that you, plural, eat from it, you, plural, will certainly die. Okay, that's Genesis 2:16 to 17.
Right.
Then he continues, what is said there also begins with the singular. You, singular, may eat from every tree in the garden for food. He continues by saying in the plural, but you shall not eat from the tree of knowledge. And here's where he makes this really, I think, fascinating exegetical move. He says, quote, for when God speaks about the command by which he wishes Adam to live by keeping it, so a positive command, he commands in the singular and says, you, singular, may eat, yada, yada. For those who walk in God's ways and cling to his commandments, even if they are many, are one because they are in agreement. Let's see here. When Adam is expressly commanded about transgression, however, so more of like a negative, God does not speak in the singular, but in the plural. You shall not eat. You, plural, shall not eat. And on the day you eat, you, plural, will certainly die. End quote. So he's not just he's almost okay with the fact on a grammatical level that the text transitions between the singular and the plural without
Right.
really any clear it would seem to the reader to be an error. And
Yeah.
he's okay with that inconsistency at the level of the text, but he draws a spiritual meaning from it. So when the text is teaching us something about perhaps what virtue and leading a life of virtue in accordance with the commandment of God, which is indicated by the use of the singular because there's a unity. Whereas if we are being lectured or criticized because of our transgressions, and it's in the plural. That's just a fascinating move that one would think, because Origen is such a philologist, that he would be interested in trying to figure out what should it be? Should it be singular or plural? And he says, this is what the text says.
Yeah.
And so it's teaching us something in that. It
Yeah. He doesn't often do anything to change the text.
No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
No, he does even so I wrote my dissertation on the homilies on the Psalms, and there are a couple, I'm forgetting where exactly, but I think they're in some of the latter homilies on Psalm 77, where he brings up the variants from, Aquila and Theodosion and Symmachus.
Right.
And he says, the text that we're reading here today is incorrect. And he shows that it's incorrect because this is what those other three translations say, and this is what the Hebrew has it. And he doesn't, the fact that the incorrect text was read at the liturgical assembly, I find very fascinating. That he's there doing this textual criticism, but they're using a text that's incorrect. And he still uses that as a way to provide beneficial meaning for his audience. It's one of the things that draws me into Origen,
Yeah.
as I was saying before.
Yeah.
And
He's very, very clever. He just doesn't miss things. Uh,
so I kind of wonder here in chapter 8, so we're on the singular and plural. Do you think is he and this question gets at this relationship between philosophy and biblical interpretation too, because he seems to be working with a distinction, kind of a Platonic distinction between truth, which is one or singular, a unity, and error or falsehood, which is a plurality.
well,
I- is that maybe also kind of floating around in Origen's thought when he's working through this?
I think that's certainly a possible thing that's in his thought. Yes.
One of the reasons why I asked that is because there was somewhere else, and I can't remember if I marked it, but you bring up the issue of, I think it was Stoic logic in one of your
Right.
footnotes. Um, and I thought it had something to do, uh, it'll probably take me too long to find. I must not have marked it for some stupid reason, but there is a footnote in there that the reader can take a look at uh, where Origin is working with Stoic logic, um, which Origin is usually regarded, I think, incorrectly, but mostly by people who aren't really specialists in Origin as being a Christian Platonist.
Hmm.
But the more I read Origin, the more I see elements of like Aristotle and Stoicism in some of his thought, and I was just kind of curious of what you thought about that. If you
Yeah.
think Stoicism too had a profound impact on him.
Yes, it did. And in fact, I published an article sometime, and I can't even think now what the title of it was, but it was on Origen's use of Stoic logic.
Hmm.
And I think it was particularly about the prologue to the Gospel of John, maybe,
Ah, okay.
where uh, where I was doing that. I'm not, as I say, I don't remember the article that well, but I do remember publishing an article on Origen's use of Stoic logic. So he certainly knew Stoic principles.
Well, I think that there's a new book, perhaps not new, but it's a few years old now, by Mark James, um, Learning the Language of Scripture. And I think he does get into Origen's relationship with Stoic logic. Um, and it seems to me um, one of the questions that I have, and I don't know if there's been a satisfactory answer um, to this question, but when we think about Origen's knowledge of Platonism or Stoicism or Aristotle, do we have, do we know whether he was reading those sources directly or if he was using perhaps like handbooks, like Alcinous, for example, or I think you cite Alexander of Aphrodisias, one of the uh, Aristotelians in the second century. Do you think he had direct knowledge, or was he using handbooks?
I think he probably had direct knowledge. He says somewhere that he studied philosophy because as his reputation grew, more and more people with philosophical backgrounds were coming to him with questions and
Yeah.
issues and things, and he wanted to be able to answer them. And so he
Hmm.
studied Platonism, for example,
Hmm.
so that he could answer these people that have questions arising from reading Platonic things.
Hmm.
And same with for Stoic stuff. So I think he studied it directly. Yeah.
That immediately got me thinking, uh, his teacher, his philosophy teacher, Ammonius Saccas, in Alexandria, Egypt, before Origen moved off to Caesarea. Um, uh, there's this whole debate um, about one origin or two origins. I don't know if you're familiar with those debates at all, but there's the argument that I think from Porphyry and his letter against the Christians, where he says Origen was born a pagan but converted to Christianity later, but Ammonius Saccas was born a Christian and converted to pagan philosophy later. And so this whole argument is Porphyry thinking of the same origin, that we know of as the Christian origin. I don't know if you're familiar with those debates on the one or two origins and what your take on the whole matter is.
Well, it's been a long, long time since I look
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
that debate, but I was not convinced that there were two origins. Uh, it was just that Porphyry or whoever was got it screwed up in his own mind and understanding.
Yeah, I'm kind of the one origin camp too. I just don't know if there's any evidence of a second origin out there. I'm not sure, at least not that I'm familiar with.
No, no,
Um,
I don't know of any real evidence that there's another person named Origin running around
mhm,
about at approximately the same time as the Origin that we talk about
yeah.
was living and working.
And Porphyry even says when he's in his life of Plotinus that there was an origin who came to one of the sessions, and Plotinus, who was a little bit younger than Origen, was I think somewhat embarrassed, that um, somebody of Origen stature would come and kind of listen to Plotinus lecture. So I think Plotinus got a little worried. So I don't know if Porphyry was there for that, or if he was getting that from another source as he's kind of telling the story of Plotinus' school. Um, but I I just don't know if Porphyry, being in that circle, would have made a mistake, uh, mistaking one origin for another, rather than just getting the Christian origin wrong. I That's kind of my thought on it, but
Hmm.
I haven't really done a ton of work on the issue myself. Um, let's see. Um, there is the opening chapter is from book 4 of On First Principles, and it is on divine inspiration. Or wait a second, is that? No, I think chapter 1 is book 4. Is it? It's after his section on divine inspiration, correct? Isn't it? I'm looking at it right now.
Uh,
Oh no, this is. Yeah, okay.
yeah, it's
So,
there.
yep, this starts with so book 4 of On First Principles starts with that section on divine inspiration, and then he gets into how to read scripture.
Right.
A couple of things I wanted to ask you about this. One is because this is where Origen brings his famous threefold understanding of Scripture, where it can apply to the body, it can apply to the soul of the reader, and the spirit of the reader. And um, other than, I think, Elizabeth Dively Loro, I think most modern scholars would say that Origen is not consistent in maintaining that threefold division of scriptural senses. Um, do you have a position on that? I'm kind of the mind, at least looking at his, like his commentary on Matthew and his commentary on John, he doesn't really go through a lot of, this is the text at the level of the body, this is the level of the soul. It seems like he's more transitioning between the surface level of the text and then a deeper meaning. I don't know what your
Right.
thoughts are on
Yes.
that, but
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I don't think that this threefold business really carries through in a definitive way in Origen's exegesis of Scripture. Uh, I think it's something, I don't know how old he was when he wrote this first chapter here of, or this book four
mhm.
of the On First Principles, but I don't think that's something that guided his Scripture interpretation. I mean, it just doesn't show up that often in his interpretation of Scripture
Mhm.
when you get into that.
No, it doesn't. I mean, he does use language of psyche, and pneumatic, so the soul and spirit. But he doesn't. One would think that when he would interpret a text, he would start with, the body level meaning, the surface level, and then a soulish, psychic reading, and then the spiritual reading. But he never does that. In fact,
No.
what he does, it seems to me most of the time, and you translated his commentary on Matthew, which I love because there you really get a sense of what he's doing. Um, where he will present a hypothesis, um, and then he'll go through, okay, well, if this is true, then we would have to do this, and then we have to do that. So he would test that hypothesis kind of before coming into his own
Right.
interpretation. I wanted to find that passage though, because for those who aren't as familiar with Origen, it's a very famous one for people who study Origen's exegesis. Um, and I cannot remember, is it from Proverbs where he's getting that from? Um, the threefold um,
Oh,
sense. I cannot remember.
I don't recall that it came from Proverbs, but
Okay, so okay, yep, here. So it's on page 35 of your translation of the Philocalia.
okay.
Um, quote, we think, therefore, okay, so I guess I'll pause there. So this is the first section after his um, discourse on um, inspiration. Quote, we think, therefore, that to understand and trace out the mind of the scriptures, one must read them along the lines of Solomon laid down in the Proverbs about recorded divine doctrines. And this is the quote from Proverbs. And you shall record them threefold with deliberation and knowledge, to provide words of truth to those who question you. That's the end quote of Proverbs. Origen continues, quote, the concepts in the holy writings must, therefore, be recorded threefold in one's soul. This is so that the simpler person may be edified by the flesh of Scripture, as it were. I love when Origen kind of says that, as it were, or so to speak,
Hmm.
which is the name we give to the obvious interpretation. So that's the kind of surface level meaning, what the words say. And the person who has ascended somewhat may be edified from its soul, as it were. The person who is perfect, however, and is like those the apostle mentions when he says, but we speak wisdom among the perfect, but not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are passing away, but we speak a wisdom of God which has been hidden in a mystery, which God foreordained for our glory before the ages. That's First Corinthians. Is edified from the spiritual law, which contains a shadow of the good things to come. For just as a human being consists of body, soul, and spirit, God caused Scripture to be given in the same way for human salvation. End quote. So that's the big, probably one of the most famous passages, don't you think, in all of Origen's works that pretty much anybody who reads Origin knows and is familiar with.
Yeah,
Um,
possibly. Yes, but you don't find him following that
yeah,
in his actual exegesis.
yeah,
He doesn't lay out three different levels of text. He may have one and two levels.
hmm,
Uh, Sometimes just one level,
yep,
uh, but extremely rarely would he say anything like this
yep,
when he's exegeting the text.
yep, yep. That's right. I really should read Dively Loro's book again. It's been a while since I've looked at it because I just haven't really been researching this particular issue in quite a while. But I should read what she says because she makes the contrary case, that Origin does actually speak about, these three different levels of meaning. So I kind of want to see what she says again. I'll have to refresh my memory on that. Um, but one Um, so I should say, what was it, 2 years ago now? Yeah, it was about 2 years ago. My colleague Kai Hines and I were talking about translating something from Origin, and he said, "Well, why don't we do the Philokalia?" I said, "Oh, that's great, what wonderful idea." So we started working on it, and then Lewis Ayres tells us, "Well, Ron Heine has a translation coming out," so we had to stop. We only got through the long anonymous prologue. So what we decided to do instead is the Catena fragments of Origen's Commentary and Lamentations. And in that text, which is a very early text, we do have Origen. There are fragments, so we don't get his whole discourse. But we do have him start with the surface level meaning, which he'll sometimes call the bodily meaning. But oftentimes he'll just say, katalexin or or katariton, or no, yeah, katariton. Does he use kata with riton? Anyway, um, lexin and riton he'll use there for like the what the simple wording on the
Right.
page means. And then he'll go to a spiritual meaning or um, uh, uh, dia noidiki he'll also use sometimes. Um, but even there, there's not the three different levels. It's just two where he transitions from one to another. Um, yeah, I just don't know. That's why I got to revisit Dively Loro's book to kind of see what she says on it. But
Yeah. Another thing that we have to be careful with is that when Origin talks about uh, the literal meaning of the text,
mhm.
that doesn't mean historical.
No. Yep.
It's just what the words say,
Yep.
but it doesn't mean that this is a statement of any kind of historical fact that you could go that way. It's
That's
just
right. Yeah, that's a very important point because for modern readers, the literal sense usually refers to something along the lines of what it meant historically, like the historical sense of it. Origin does actually, surprisingly, for some people who think that he just eschews all history, Origin does actually show pretty good knowledge of the historical context of the writings, especially in his commentary on Lamentations. It's really wonderful how he gets into detail about what was going on at the time. But when he talks about literal, yeah, it's just what the words on the text say, um,
right.
without any really without any investigation into the matter at all.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so ooh, 10:30. Okay, we've got time to do a couple more, maybe one more or so from the Philokalia. Um, there was another one that I wanted to bring up. Where is it? It's 24. Okay, so chapter 24, like you said, is it's not actually from Origin. That one comes. It's from Methodius, right? And his treatise on free will, which, for whatever reason, do you think this was included by the Cappadocians, or was this something that was inserted later? I don't know
Yeah,
if we know the answer.
I think I talk about that somewhere. I'd already point out that we don't really know the
Hmm.
answer to that question. Uh, whether and if, who put it in if it is inserted later.
All right, and then I found out what I wanted to ask you. Okay, in chapter 2, um, so this one is uh, Philokalia, chapter 2 comes from his commentary on Psalm 1. And I'll just quote here. Is it? Okay. Quote, and since we are about to begin the interpretation of the Psalms, I shall prefix a very interesting tradition about all divine scripture in general, which I received from the Hebrew. He used to say that because all inspired scripture lacks clarity, it has been compared to a single house with numerous locked rooms. There is a key beside each room, but it is not the key for that room. And so the keys are scattered around the rooms, but they do not fit the rooms by which they lie. It is an enormous job to discover the keys and match them with the rooms that they open. The scriptures, therefore, are understood to be unclear, and the resources to understand them are believed to come from no other source than the scriptures, since their interpretive principle is scattered among them. I think, therefore, that the apostle too is suggesting bringing the divine sayings together when he says, which things we also speak, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in words taught by the Spirit, comparing spiritual things with spiritual things. End quote. And that's 1 Corinthians 2:13 at the end. So he's got this great tradition. Scripture is like this huge house with many different rooms. There's a key by each door, but the key is not necessarily associated with that specific door. But he received this from the Hebrew. Now, this is another thing that anybody that has spent a lot of time with Origen knows. He talks about this character on a couple of different occasions. Who this Hebrew is, and you have a nice little section in your introduction on it. Um, who is this Hebrew? What do we know about him?
Well, we don't know who he was in terms of being able to put a name to him, I think.
Hmm.
I think that he was dead by the time Origen was writing. Origen knew him earlier, I think, and learned these things from him or heard him talk about these things. But I think he always talks about him in the past tense
Hmm.
when he mentions the Hebrew in when he
Hmm.
talks about it. So I think I don't know exactly, I don't know who he was, but he's somebody who seemed to have been respected in the Alexandrian church, probably,
Hmm.
and certainly respected by Origen. And he, to Origen, picked up a lot of things from him. But
So we can exclude Philo because when Origen talks about Philo, who is a Greek speaker, not
right,
Hebrew, he usually refers to him as, one of our predecessors, one of my predecessors.
yeah,
But this person he actually just calls the Hebrew. Um, I know some people think he must have been kind of a Jewish Christian, a Hebrew-speaking Christian. Some people he was actually just Jewish. But yeah, he's kind of a mysterious figure in Origen's thought, isn't he?
yes. I think there was a Hebrew congregation in Alexandria. Uh,
Even early in the third century, they hadn't all been exiled yet.
I think no, I think there's still a bit of a Hebrew community
Mhm.
left there, uh, and he may have been a part of that
Hmm.
congregation, or we don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, but he Origin was very impressed by the person,
Mhm.
and he gets some of the basic things of his exegetical practice. He attributes to this guy, like just
Mhm.
comparing one scripture with another scripture to try to find out what that scripture means.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of a name or a guess at a name, I don't have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
guessing, but do you have a guess?
I know. I have no clue actually. One of the things I find interesting about this character, though, is that we know that when he moved to Caesarea, uh, which is what is that? That's probably about a 90-minute drive from Jerusalem. So it's in modern day Israel. And we know that there is a thriving Jewish community there where when Origen got there. There is a rabbinical academy there,
Right.
and we know that he interacted with them. And you bring this out in your 2010 book. scholarship in the service of the church. That Origen, when he moved to Caesarea, really became profoundly impacted by his encounter with the rabbis there and the local Jewish community. But here we have him reflecting on this mysterious Hebrew character before he gets to Caesarea.
Right.
Um, One thing I do think, you know, Origen, in a lot of his discussions of Judaism, is highly critical. They were religious competitors at the time, and um, he he'll get accused by a lot of modern readers or postmodern readers, perhaps, of supersessionism. That term that I'm just not a huge fan of. But he'll get accused of really not liking the Jews that much. Um, but I think he actually had a pretty profound respect for them. And I think he appreciated uh, their intellectual abilities. I don't know what your thoughts are, but I think who is it? Delange, Nicholas Delange,
Nicholas Delange.
yeah, Origin and the Jews. I think he was right in that book, and I think Origin does show a pretty high regard for the Jewish people.
Yes, yes, I do too. And uh, Philo is a Jew,
Hmm.
was a Jew. But Philo has a, origin, maybe the one who saved Philo's text for us
Hmm.
today.
Hmm.
Uh, some think that maybe he took Philo's text with him when he moved to Caesarea from
Yeah.
Alexandria. Uh, so he always speaks highly of Philo when he
Hmm.
talks about him. But the Hebrew, when he talks about the Hebrew, this is not Philo, I'm pretty sure.
That's not Philo, yeah. I don't think he would have called him the Hebrew.
No.
Um, that's actually quite interesting, how Philo's work survived. Um, Reading Origen's homilies on the Psalms, I've kind of slowly been working on a paper on this subject. Um, he'll talk about, his predecessor in a number of these different homilies, and the manner in which he does so is quite interesting because he'll he'll reference him as if he took time to see what, like he used him as a reference as he was preparing for his homilies. So, his homilies are usually thought to be delivered extemporaneously, um, as if there was no preparation going into them. But when you read how he's working with Philo, I can't remember some of the specific examples in the homilies, but it seems like Origen was reading the psalm in preparation for the homily. And, he wanted to see what Philo had to say on this because he might have known Philo said something. Then he goes to the library and looks up what Philo says. So there's a deal of preparation there. And it suggests also, if that's the case, if he's not working strictly from memory, which the extent to which he does this, it suggests that he's actually got the text with him um, somewhere. Does indicate that he might have brought some of Philo's works with him to Caesarea when he moved there.
Mhm.
Um, Didymus the Blind in the fourth century, if you look at his commentary on Genesis, boy, um, it's almost like he's got Philo right there with him as he's lecturing, and he's saying, "This is what Philo says," and he's just kind of reading right off the text. So Didymus is another one I think who helped to preserve some of Philo's works, but Origen, yeah, I think you might be right on that. Brought him with him to Caesarea. All right. Well, I think we've covered enough to get people introduced to the Philokalia. Now, I wanted to finish up um, because so much of my work on Origin has started with your translations, and you've been translating. When your homilies on Genesis and Exodus translation was what, late 90s, and commentary on John, I think, was early 90s, right? So
Probably,
been,
yes.
it's been a long time, and this might be your last. Um, Tell us
Well, it
what
actually isn't, but
it
but
isn't. It
no,
isn't. Oh, okay.
no.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to ask you this anyways. What insights have you gained, and what would you share and pass down to people like myself who aspire to translate um, Origen's works or just any works in general? What have you learned as a translator?
Well, sometimes I think haven't learned anything. uh, I've learned a lot about, well, since its origin, I do most of my translating from. I've learned a lot about origin because you have to read the text extremely carefully if you're going to translate it, and
Mhm,
you look at words and what does this word mean, and different words mean different things in different contexts sometimes.
mhm,
So you have to take a lot of things like that into consideration. Uh, so I've learned to pay attention to the text, careful
mhm,
attention to the text always. What does he say here? And what hints does he give us? Maybe I don't know. I don't see anything here right now to put my finger on, but uh, sometimes you'll see word here. Yeah, I remember. I remember that word was back here somewhere, and you go back and you look there and you find that word. What was he saying about it there? So moves like that help.
mhm,
Uh, uh, but yeah, it's just paying careful attention to what the Greek or Latin text says,
mhm,
and try to put it in. And you have to ask, well, so how would we say that in English, American
mhm,
English, from my standpoint?
mhm,
Uh, and try to do that in a way that communicates it and still stays true to the words
mhm.
that Origin used. So I don't just go off and do a paraphrase of Origin.
Yeah.
I don't think any of my translations do that.
Mm,
They are paying careful attention to what his actual words say and mean.
mm,
So uh, yeah, I think that's the kind of things I've learned from
mm,
translating Origin.
mm.
Uh,
Well, you talked about the paying attention to the words. Some of the words that are very difficult, logos is probably the most difficult in kind of my short experience, because it's got deep theological meaning, philosophical meaning, but then it could also just mean like something like verse or very
yeah,
simple a word. Um, then there's some of the other philosophical language that he uses to talk about the different senses. So sometimes he'll use, um, when he wants to talk about a spiritual meaning, he'll say pneumatiki for spiritual, but then sometimes he'll also say dianoidiki or uh, nuidiki to kind of say the same thing, but they're different words. And you
right,
have to try to find out how to best render them without blurring them. That is a really difficult part. Um, but another difficult part, as I'm finding, is I want to, in my effort to stay true to Origin's wording. Sometimes it's incredibly difficult because if I translate a paragraph and I stick so closely to the word, it's almost it's unreadable if you go kind of word for
right,
word translation. So you do have to kind of finagle it to get it into some kind of readable form of English.
true, yes,
What, what is one of the things that I'm facing in my translation of On Prayer is what to do with plurals. Um, because Origin will use plural verbs and plural participles a lot. And in one of the older English translations, the translator translates them in the singular. So, where he might say, idomen or uh, exitadzontes, so either like, let us look at, idomen or exitanzotes, having examined, we, because that's plural, then in the English translation, in one of them, those are rendered into the singular.
Hmm.
Um, but I can't help but think when we keep them with the plural, we're almost, it gives a kind of a different sense, a different feeling to what's going on in the text. On the one hand, one in the singular kind of reads like Origin is just sitting down at his desk writing this. Whereas if we look at the plural, and I think you've brought this up in your book Scholarship in Service of the Church when you're talking about the context of Origen's writings, you say his use of the plural is actually quite indicative of a group or classroom setting. I don't know what you think about that. I mean, that's one of the biggest questions I face. Um, Translating, what to do with that. Um, I don't know,
Yeah.
just my
Yeah.
thoughts.
I normally, very rarely would I change. If it's in the plural, would I change it to the singular or
Mhm,
vice versa? I try to leave the number of the
mhm,
verb
mhm,
the way it is, and try to see what, maybe why, or how can it make sense if it's in the plural and when I want to say singular. But I, I, I don't ever just automatically switch from plural to singular or vice versa. Uh, I try to stay true to what Origin is saying,
mhm.
and have
So
to
some
say,
of the
well, go figure it out.
some of the difficulty then has to do more with the syntax than with the numbering of verbs and participles then, because the syntax really does. I mean, if I stick with the same syntax Origin is using my paragraph, you don't know what it's saying. I have to adjust things here and there
Yeah,
to get it to make sense. I did remember one thing I was wanted to ask you before we finish up, and it shouldn't take that long, but most people who are introduced to Origin start with on first principles as their gateway into Origin. Like the Origin 101 begins with on first principles. You argue, I think very interestingly, that the Philocalia makes a better introduction to the thought of origin. I was wondering perhaps if you could say a word or two about that.
yeah. Well, I think first of all, if you start with the on first principles, how the text is all messed up with the on
Hmm.
first principles for one thing, and sometimes we don't know what Origin really said
Hmm.
in the way that the jumble that the text has fallen into. Uh, because we he wrote it in Greek, and what we have it is in Latin, and the Latin comes out of the fourth century.
Hmm.
Excuse me. When some of these people are not friends of Origin, even who are doing the translation of him. So, I think the Philokalia, where you got your text in Greek, and they cover a wide variety of the topics that Origin treats in his various writings. It seems to me that if you wanted to have a beginning book for introducing Origin, that Philokalia does a better job of it than the On First Principles does, uh, because just too many things have happened to that text that are on first principles.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
so that's and I think what's the guy's name? I can't think of his name now. Anyway, the guy that did the text that I translate from.
Oh, John Bear.
No, not John. Uh, the guy who that
Oh,
John
Robinson.
Robinson. Yeah,
Robinson. Yeah,
I think
yeah.
Robinson makes a similar statement somewhere
Hmm.
about the Philokalia being a better
Hmm.
introductory point for students who are trying to
Hmm.
come to Origin for the first time.
Well, I think that's very interesting, and I think the point is taken. Just for example. So the Philocalia starts with Book 4 of On First Principles, which is often thought to be Origen's hermeneutic theory, for example.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that that's the case, but that's often how it's read. But you don't get practice in there. Um, you don't get to see Origen's own exegesis in Book 4. But here, okay, so it starts out with Book 4 in the Philokalia. So you get the theory, but then every subsequent chapter is you get to see Origen's interpretation in action.
Right.
Whereas if you read Book 4 just by itself, you're missing that whole component. Whereas this kind of presents you with a broad array of what Origen is up to when he's interpreting the biblical text. It's
Yes.
a
Yeah.
very interesting point.
And you get all kinds of text. I mean, you got sermon material,
Hmm.
and you've got his philosophical thinking, and you've got, you know, from his commentaries.
Yep.
All of that is here in the Philokalia.
Yep. From almost everywhere except on prayer, which
Yeah.
is what I'm working on right now. Okay, so to wrap up, like I said, uh, I usually like to start with a quote, but this time I think I'm going to end with a quote. So, if you could read the last paragraph in your preface, um, Roman numeral 8.
Oh, okay. I even had it marked. I don't know why I was searching for it. Okay, this is what I said there. Origen's theology was a theology drawn from Scripture, and most of his literary work was devoted to the examination and exposition of Scripture, as a perusal of Jerome's list of Origen's literary productions in his Epistle 33:4 makes clear. Most of the selections that make up this little collection of excerpts known as the Philocalia of Origen are about Scripture, many of them coming from works that have perished, and all of them in one way or another displaying Origen's fundamental interest in the teachings of Scripture. My hope is that it will introduce many to the greatest exegete in the ancient church.
Professor Heine, thank you very much for joining me on PatristiCast today.
Thank you for the invitation.